Breeding has been one of the most consequential systems to attribute to ARK's continued success. Introduced as a simple Tamagotchi effect-like bond to bring players and creatures closer than any survival game before, taking a deeper look will quickly strike survivors as one of, if not the, most complex mechanics in the game. Seriously, feeling like you need a rocket scientist's degree to fully understand its attribute point distribution, chances of combining between mating dinos, and the ever-dreaded overwhelming mutation manipulation RNG. But rest that mind, dear young survivors, as we explain breeding, mutating, how many mechanics actually got added over the years, and how breeding really did evolve. And it all began here, some 4 months following its release. That's right, breeding wasn't always in ARK, and in patch 219 on October the 14th, 2015, dino babies were announced to arrive to ARK, a brand new system to watch babies grow dynamically in real time, following, and I quote, using well-endowed creatures to get busy mating and resulting in an offspring with a random selection of traits from both parents. With an encouragement to pursue high-level wild dinos with more high-end traits, aka stat notes, and interesting that actual traits would arrive later, this would be initially introduced with oviparous egg-laying creatures only, leaving survivors to figure out how to incubate fertilized eggs dropped from their mated parents. A far cry from mating today. Players were initially allowed to ride dinos whilst mating, with incredibly low mating intervals of 1 to 3 hours, and allow babies to eat straight out of troughs, though would later be changed to allow unridden mating, no baby trough eating below 10% maturation, and the much longer intervals we know today. Despite changes, mating was engaged by naturally having two species of opposite gender, not following anything, and wandering enabled with a dino select wheel, causing dinos to move about at their own devices, and providing to be within their specific dino mesh bounds range would continue to mate. Though, with that complexity of creatures forever on the move whilst on wander, players would either need to track and field spam that whistle stop command, or build breeding pens to not allow their dinos to escape range, adding to that structure build limit. In fact, mating was planned to be much more interactive, with dev kit animated simulations activated when ready to prepare your fertilized eggs. Yeah, YouTube literally won't allow us to show these to explain how graphic they were, and more than likely why developers Wildcard decided to pull out before they pulled out. And hatching your fertilized eggs became an adventure in itself. Luckily, the air conditioner unit unlocked at level 61 was already a craftable item in the game, crafted through a fabricator, but a costly price with less understanding in a much more primitive and slower leveling base game back then, leaving many players to experiment with torches, building insulation and location, along with environmental time-changing temperatures, with a base understanding heat already played a vital part to survivor fortitude. At launch, egg incubator timers weren't available either, meaning players would have to hang around making sure their eggs didn't spoil if losing incubation, and with most racing for Rex eggs especially, would be seeing 5 hours plus juggling between the right temperatures and not risk losing their precious offspring to spoiling. And that's before pressing the wrong button to accidentally eat an egg. Yeah, back in the early years, there were no prompts before eating an egg, meaning new players not used to the item throw key would think interacting with it in its inventory would make sense, myself included, and it happened a lot. It was, though, with a joyous welcome to those not advanced enough that a new incubating dino would get added a few months later that we sadly just don't appreciate nearly as much as we did then, the Dimetrodon. A difficult tame with its rapid depleting torpor, once tamed, could offer both hypothermal and hyperthermal insulation, increased dramatically if leveling melee, could see even later added wyvern eggs hatched with 1100 melee. Hard to believe there was a time when these things were actually desired. Worth noting, Kairuku, added 1 month later, offered insulation too, but it just never felt enough to use effectively without any army in one spot. But back to eggs. Once hatched, hatched. Players would learn the phenomenally rapid rates babies would die to if having no food in their inventory, originally twice as quick as they do now, with Wildcard implementing vast changes to dial back consumption to 60% with double the maturation, then 40% with a further 30% maturation, then back to its original 250% consumption, and finally divided by half to balance the sea of dead dino babies. Yes, it sounds as confusing as I just said it. Babies once hatched would require hand feeding, accessing their inventories and placing food inside to keep their food value full, and depending if a carnivore or herbivore would require meat or berries. Raw meat being the higher food value of 50 points per feed and being easily farmed was the best choice for carnivores. Mejo berries being the higher food value of 30 points per feed, 10 more than other berries, was the best choice for herbivores, and obviously omnivores you could choose either. At 0.1% up to 10% during its baby stage, babies can eat at an extraordinarily quick rate. However, each creature has its own unique variable, which then slows down the older it gets. So, for example, a Rex will require 70.81 food points per minute at birth, or 1.42 pieces of meat, but a Karka will require 97 food points per minute, or 1.95 pieces of meat. At 5%, a Rex slows down to 65.2 per minute, and a Karka 88.12 per minute. Reaching 10% will allow your creatures to eat out of food troughs, entering into their juvenile stage, with no need to hand feed anymore, and any will prioritise its closest proximity trough first, provided there's food in there, and represented in proximity by a trough symbol above its head. To example how much their food consumption slows down, by 50% reaching their adolescent stage, a Rex now eats at 37.77 food points per minute, and a Karka 51.85 per minute, continuing to slow down right until they hit 100%. Then of course you've got the time it'll actually take to raise. A Rex can take up to 3 days, 20 hours and 30 minutes to fully raise from hatch, and a Karka 10 days, 3 hours and 59 minutes. Yeah. Of course, this is based on 1x official rates, with any unofficial or event rates completely changing that consumption speed. But if it wasn't obvious, always make sure there's food in your troughs to feed your babies, isn't it? Barely 1 week later, with the arrival of version 220 on the 20th of October, mammals and flyers would enter the breeding roster, entering a new stage of breeding to replace incubation. Gestation. Offering a new indicator on mated females, just like incubated eggs awaiting the allotted time to birth, with a physical process of the impregnated female's belly becoming larger and larger, with now 2 to feed, requiring double the food consumption up until your born mammal. It was actually considered to add craving requirements, just like a rhino, back then too, which thankfully we never saw. In the very same patch, random possibilities of genetic twins and triplets were now possible, with 10% and 2% chances respectively, and despite the ever-ongoing arguments, would later be confirmed not to be increased with any dino or ability, but with plans to introduce recessive genetic inbreeding penalties, which we'd come to learn would be adapted into those anticipated mutations later. After a few baby additions, with the arrival of new dinos such as the Giga in November, introducing a monolithic raising time of 2 whole weeks, perhaps the biggest influence on breeding would be introduced with version 242 and Breeding Mechanics Phase 2 Interactive Baby Raising. ARK's awesome anniversary event 1 year after launch on June 2nd, 2016 would introduce imprints, a revolutionary opportunity to not just increase your dino stats by 20% once fully imprinted, but an imprinter rider bonus to whoever initially claimed the dino, giving a 30% boost to both damage and resistance when at full affinity, requiring every 4 hours either a simple cuddle prompt, a whistle to walk it so far, or hand feed them a selection of required foods. Succeeding one would offer a granted cutesy welcoming animation and some affinity towards your max 100%. However, attaining that 100% would be anything but easy, as 2 new mechanics required even more attention than ever. Firstly, alongside any meat or berries, any kibble could be requested, and remember, this was at a time when kibble was associated with every single dino. And see my full how it evolved vid on that if you want to learn more, pluggity plug plug. Which meant you needed all at hand just in case that Dimorph, Trudon or Bronto Kibble requirement popped up. And then 4-hour imprints. 4-hour imprints! 4-hour intervals needing you to log on and get your imprints done before cryopods, before tech, before nursing dinos with nothing to keep your sleep in check, as the most masochist of players would raise those fortnight long gigas. Not forgetting cuddle timers, at least on 1x, would be absolutely punishing, allowing almost no time at all to miss a single imprint. Being even a few minutes late on one imprint could see your baby raising to 100% without full imprint, which has thankfully been much more forgiving nowadays, especially with event rates. But truthfully, most players learn to just share accounts if unofficial. It's a wonder really how many accounts might have got stolen this way, but if you weren't account sharing, you were definitely sleep deprived. But at least the wait would be worth it to finally own much stronger creatures that Boss Guardians felt almost possible now. Of course, by this point, stat breeding would be absolutely commonplace, as players looked to tame every high level creature they could to breed together and make super high level dinos before the next massive change to breeding would arrive. But how did that all work, I hear you ask? Well, for every creature level in ARK, a stat point is offered. Every creature has their own base level 1 stats, and for every point put into either health or melee, that level increases with each. So picture a 150 wild dino is no different to you leveling a level 1 dino 149 times, with a random choice of how many levels have been put into each stat to make it the level 150 it is now. When you tame a creature, you get additional levels added to that dino, and depending on the starting level of the wild, how well your taming effectiveness was, you'll get bonus levels added to that dino once tamed, up to 75 levels for a 100% perfect 150 tame. But again, these new levels added will be at random too, so you could get a 150 wild having 35 points into its health stat, a really good start, but if RNG gets the best of you, and it will often more than not, you might get only 5 points of those 75 points going into health. Or you might get super lucky and get 25 points going into health once tamed, which would make it 60 points into health. So now you've got a tamed creature that's giving you a free 60 levels into health, but better yet, the more starting levels it has, the more health it'll get when manually leveling now. So a level 1 Rex with 1100 health would get 5.4% of its starting health when leveled each time, meaning 59.4 health per level. But a level 225 Rex with 8000 health would get 432 per level, because that's still 5.4%. So you can imagine everyone wanting to find those perfect rare chance tame dinos with 50 plus points into one of their stats like health, and then repeat again and again and again to find another perfect rare chance tame dino with 50 plus points into another stat like melee. To try and keep this simple, now they've got one male Rex with 50 in health and 24 in melee, and they've got one female Rex with 22 in health but 49 in melee. To get their offspring to hatch with both the 50 health and 49 melee, a calculation takes place every time they mate, and will only always be based on their tamed stats, not any manual levels you've added. There's a 55% chance the baby can inherit the stronger stat, and that calculation is made for every single stat, so there's almost equally a chance to inherit the weaker stat. But if they get lucky and get a baby to inherit both the 50 health point and the 49 melee points, that's already a level 99 dino before even accounting for the other stats, and why the offspring could and would be even higher than those original perfect 225 level parents. And now all you've got to do is mate that new baby back to the original mother or father. Yeah, no. To get a second baby with the same stats of the opposite gender, and bingo! Any baby these new Rexes breed out will always inherit the same stats, as they're both the same now. They could get super lucky and get the best stats as well as the opposing gender twins, and if they do, lucky them. But it's more than likely up until this point there's been a lot of taming and a lot of breeding to get the best possible dinos they can. As breeding became much more popular with imprints, so did the desire to trade with each other, and with breeders desiring to protect their hard work, Wildcard decided to offer a new option with version 248 in October 2016 to allow you to spay or neuter dinos, preventing said dino from being bred again and keeping the buyer's market running strong. And it was about to get even stronger. Version 252 arrived the next month in November to unveil random mutations and family trees. The most complex system even seasoned players are still learning today, but perhaps one of the biggest reasons for ARK's continued longevity. See, every time two dinos mate, as well as calculating which stat the offspring will inherit, a chance roll for a mutation can happen. Upon the completion of mating, the resulting fertilized egg or gestated creature has a 7.31% chance to mutate. And in fact, if incredibly lucky, can offer up to 3 mutations, though the chances become incredibly lower, with 2 mutations offering a 0.184% chance and 3 mutations an eye-watering 0.00156% chance. But what the hell is a mutation? Every time a mutation occurs, a new calculation takes place to determine 1. Which of the 2 parent stats it decides to mutate, 2. Exactly which stat of that selected parent it will mutate, 3. Choose a colour region of the mutated baby to change, which may not be a colour region it has, and 4. Apply 2 points or levels to that stat on the baby. Back when this revolutionary mechanic was introduced, there was only one clear visible indicator to confirm a mutation had taken place, and that was the UI menu addition of a family tree. With each baby bred, you could now access its inventory to view the parents' names it was born from, and their parents before them, and their parents before them, and so on, but more importantly, its mutation count. With each mutation that occurs, a value would be added to either the patrilineal or matrilineal family trees to tell you if it came from the male or female parent, with notably a max value of 20 to attain, and once capping that 20 out of 20, no more mutations could be received from that parent. However, that didn't mean mutations couldn't stop at all, because as long as at least one parent has below 20 mutations, there was still a chance to mutate, but at a much lower chance, a reduction of 55% if the 20 capped parent has the higher stats, but a 45% reduction if the 20 capped parent has the lower stats. The bigger problem though with mutations and family trees is keeping track of your mutations. So if now breeding your baby with one mutation back to its parent, that mutation will forever remain the family tree of any offspring between these two. If, however, breeding your baby with one mutation to another baby with the same mutation, despite it not having your stats and adding 2 levels, you've now got 2 mutations, and 18 to go before you've capped that family tree. If you bred that 2 mutations to another, it's now 4 mutations, and so on, continuing to be multiplied without any improvement. So, breeders learnt to understand this. First, have male and female parents with the exact same stats. Keep an eye on those family tree mutations the entire time and make sure it remains at 0 as you keep breeding to inherit all of the best stats you want to make those 2 perfect mutation-free or clean parents. Breed them until you have an army of females with the same stats too. The more you've got, the higher your chances of getting a mutation. And once you've got a mutation, it's firstly much more clear because of the level change, remembering it's 2 extra levels for every mutation, and secondly, you want to make sure it's male. If it's female, not to panic, you've simply got to breed that to your clean male until you get a male offspring with the same mutation. Now, breed that mutated male to all of your clean females. Any egg or gestation from these now not only has the chance to roll for a new mutation, but to calculate the difference in stats too because of those extra 2 levels from that first mutation. And eventually you'll find that all-important second mutation clearly represented by 2 more levels on the offspring. And again, and once hitting 20 capped mutations, you can still continue to mutate, just at a much lower chance now. And that was pretty much the basics, with players needing to keep track of what stats stat was mutating by writing them down or naming them, or using the variety of online apps or calculators that could help explain how many levels were represented by each stat. It got way more advanced later on with official level caps and new mutation categories, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Alongside the arrival of some of the first text structures, including underwater bases, patch 256 in March 2017 now included breeding of aquatic and amphibious creatures, with still the same gestations to those that applied, but now jelly-like floating eggs from oviparous layers, which originally couldn't be picked up or moved, meaning water pens were an absolute must now. With Moses and Tuzos originally taking as long as a giga to raise though, and I swear Tuzos were quickly patched from like a 3 or 4 day raise. Only the really committed players would be taking advantage until a huge change to maturation timers came later. Speaking of which, perhaps more monumental for the same patch, or at least 256.3, incubating eggs would finally display a numerical percentage value, telling you at least how much longer you had to go, that you could do some math with some breeding apps such as Dododex to get a rough time to wait, as well as being visible via highlighted tooltips in your inventory as part of the brand new UI interface overhaul. Though a dark day would arrive in June later that year, with a well-circulating exploit discovered to be patched that any babies floating in water would consume less food. And man, it really was a time in ARK. Everyone and their mothers having their very own personal water birthing pools. But as we waved goodbye to the end of an era, it seemed almost intentional, as Wildcard were cooking up a replacement. Version 260 late June introduced us to the Tech Trough, a Megapithecus beating unlocked structure that acted like a normal feeding trough but with refrigeration, multiplying that spoil timer by 100 with 100 slots, way above that 70 of normal troughs. This finally allowed raw meat and berries to be used effectively and find players able to leave babies raising instead of constantly refreshing spoil timers. Speaking of refrigeration or insulation, 267 in August 2017 delivered us the Otter. In celebration of ARK entering its launch from early access, we got a brand new egg incubating creature, and just like the Dimetrodon, leveling melee could find these to also incubate eggs, and well, one less reason to tame Dimetrodons. Following a few months later, with the arrival of Aberration in December, a new unique type of breeding got introduced we'd forever herald as the best to date. Right? Human pregnancy. Yeah, by whittling down a Queen Reaper's health to below 2k health would find her warming to your courageous self by ensnaring you and just popping a little friendly baby Reaper embryo in your belly, needing you to gain experience during your pregnancy to give the most horrific birth to a baby that would eat your face off, causing actual maternity wars like cages to be built by all players as they'd await those cuddle timers, which we'd finally see changing. At long last, Wildcard realised we needed a break and changed those cuddle interval imprint timers from 4 hours to 8 hours. Finally, actual 4-night sleep was possible whilst baby raising in ARK, and it was about to get a lot easier. As patch 278 in Feb 2018 would find the Procoptodon receiving a TLC update with a nod to that water raising exploit some months before. Most small to medium creatures in their infancy could now be stored within a mate-boosted female ruse pouch, consuming less food whilst pouched, and especially double the imprint bonus. A huge benefit for creatures up to Therazinos, though with varying rates on when they'd be too big to be held, and some hope held out for much larger breeding creatures would arrive later that year, removing the need for those giant sexy time houses. Cryopods, though, later patched in version 291, could cryo up babies to pause their aging and imprinting, allowing players to take as much time between breeding as they wanted, and in fact the minor patch following added a new mating option, finally allowing creatures to mate without wandering all over the shop. Hooray! And perhaps most of all, kibble. Once again, pluggity plug. We've covered the whole saga of how kibble changed in our previous vid, but this essentially saw the cuddle imprint requirement of every single dino egg to just 6. as it was discovered extraordinary kibble could satisfy the same imprint requirement as any lower tiered kibble. A huge step in server performance struggles, with more to be patched later, as something that got dubbed baby bombing would become rife throughout servers, essentially allowing unclaimed dinos to continue breeding, allowing any troll to set up if they wanted to stress any server, and thankfully got patched up in version 312.35 of July 2020, along with a motherload of maturation balance changes in 312.65, finally bringing Moza and Tuzos down to easier going raising timers to match Utis, as well as reduction timers to Rhinos, Dunkleos and Quetzals. Perhaps the biggest change at the time though, wandering babies. Oh my god. Wandering bloody babies, man, the bane of any breeder, could finally find anything that hatched stayed exactly where it was. And a few months later, in November 2020, with patch 316, we could hatch a few more things, namely insects and wyverns. At long last, the final category of creatures entered the breeding fold, with Arthros and Mantis particularly being favourable, but of course wyverns being a huge moment for the community as one of their favourite creatures, alongside a reduction of the Giga maturation by 15% and a new taming tracker that wouldn't quite come into use for some breeding yet, but a sign of things to come. And boy did they come! With the final story map for Evolved dropping in June 2021, Gen 2 introduced us to two huge changes for breeding. Firstly, the egg incubator, a massive step from forever making sure of eggs not spoiling on the ground to simply popping in a purpose-fit machine and await your eggs to fully incubate to being hatch ready. Even more welcomed the ability to finally view stat points. Players could view stat points without mods or online calculators to see if their eggs were worth waiting to incubate, or use the incubator to destroy the egg. Secondly, Maewings, and boy, were these most definitely a game changer to breeding when introduced. Their ability to pick up and store large creatures in one of their 4 saddle slots alone made a huge difference to raising space, but when turning that tap on and letting the milk teats shower heavenly drops of that calcium-rich good stuff, the magic really began to express itself. See, turning on nursing effectiveness wouldn't just offer a good chuckle, but allow to feed any nearby babies in its radius, extended if leveling its purpose-fit nursing stat, and would be later changed to food for another creature, meaning you could now store all the food you needed for babies on one high-weight Maewing, and then food in your tech troughs, and that was it. No more food spoiling checkups ever again. No more hand feeding. On top of making it much easier for walk imprints if in difficult to navigate areas, its perhaps biggest feature that I literally just only found out about, what the hell, was food satisfaction. Another replicated feature for the later ASA variant Maeguana, every point in food would increase how many food points it feeds to nearby babies by 1% per level in food, meaning raw meat, for example, that normally feeds a baby 50 food, a Maewing with even 30 points in food that you'd easily find at base tamed level would instead offer 65 food points per raw meat, leveled and mutated in its food stat, and you could quickly find one raw meat feeding double or triple the amount per meat. And ASE wasn't quite done yet implementing new breeding changes after the arrival of breedable rock drakes and acatinas in October 2021 with patch 338.23, and then a quality of life change to egg incubators in December 2021 with patch 340.19, allowing a new gestation monitoring to buff your characters to now view embryo stats of gestating creatures for level point reviewing with mammals to keep all reset. ARK's final proper ASE map would reveal a breeder's drinkable dream. Fjorda, arriving in June 2022, would include the fan favourite Desmodus draculae, a cave-flapping wonder of a bloodthirsty creature. More importantly for this, its ability to produce Sanguine Elixer. Crafted straight in its inventory from 200 blood packs obtained by killing creatures with the Big Bat would find a potion that offered 30% imprint affinity. A one-time per baby use, but an absolute swan song for the evolved offering that players are still very much excited to find returning to the Unreal 5 remade version of ARK that had an arsenal of breeding improvements right at launch. See, ARK Ascended didn't just remake the game, but introduced a lot of new changes when we thought we had it easy enough. Arriving in October 2023, ASA firstly expanded on the UI tracker interface, now not just tracking your taming dinos, but your tamed ones too. And that meant babies could be tracked, allowing you to see from anywhere on the map their progress, when they last ate, their health and food stats, and the ability to select between your personal babies raising or the entire tribes. Along with that, incubating eggs finally giving you a countdown timer to tell you exactly how long to expect rather than just a percentage, rendering any external calculators less necessary now. On top, an overlay to give you much more detail about the baby you're raising, with plans for additions we'd find later on. Oviraptors had been given a huge quality of life treatment too, now not only used for improved egg rate production, but now the ability to collect both regular eggs and fertilised eggs, with its range extended depending on level, removing the last waiting around part of breeding for good. With lastly at launch, wild babies, allowing you to begin raising and imprinting any if Bruce waning their parents first. In fact, at launch for a very brief period offered taming levels too. But a quick removal would soon discover why, along with another feature players have been used to up until now. See, up until this moment, including through ASE, any imprint requirement could be refreshed once by simply cryoing up a baby creature and throwing it back out. Only once mind, but yeah, that too got removed over December for the new year to explain why. Because hello Gigantoraptor, added in Feb 2024 with its own unique mimic taming process to steal its young and raise to claim as your own. Once raised and saddled, offered itself as a new egg incubator for any eggs, but only 2 at a time, but once hatched allowing you to buff their stats even more, but only after completing a bonding process requiring you to kill a specified amount of creatures until fully bonded to continue to be buffed in its presence of its parental Gigantoraptor and recently leveled or having killed something. A very unique addition that perhaps isn't really used as much as it planned to be. But what certainly was, at least back then, was imprint refreshing, a new take on that cryopod exploit to instead offer a one-time bird call to refresh to a different imprint requirement, with the same call also used to detect any nearby wild babies and claim them with tamed levels from the Gigantoraptor, though to do so you need at least a 225 base tamed level Gigantoraptor and all 88 levels, something I'm still trying to do myself. And lastly, feathers. Depending on the highest stat of your Gigantoraptor would find a cooldown to pluck feathers from, with a percentage chance of improvement of inheriting the stats of any mating creatures you place the feathers within. Meaning if you had a Gigantoraptor with the exact best base stats in health and melee, you had a chance of plucking either, and the higher the level, the better the chances. Damn man, I forgot how useful for breeding a Gigantoraptor is. April 2024 saw the re-arrival of Scorched Earth, and with that, Bob's Tall Tales DLC, with its phase 1 of 3 offering 2 new breeding advantages. Platform carts created a wild ability to transfer anything dropped on one to be transferred to a trough, meaning mountainous stacks of crop plots could be stacked on one to automatically keep your troughs filled full of all the berries you'd need. It's a wonder when Gen 2 arrives and our seeds become available if we'll be able to do these with them too. And gigantic shadow casting Oasis saws entering the fold, initially feeling like a PvPer's worst nightmare but turning out to be a breeder's dream, as any creature you lost to an unfortunate death could now be reborn, dropping a death essence bag, which you'd see using all of an Oasis saw's food to bring your favourite dinos back from the dead. better yet, could be used to transfer imprints from one player to another, but we haven't quite got to that structure yet. Aberration's Revival and Bob's Tall Tales DLC Phase 2, however, arriving in September 2024, would not only find a new embryo incubator, allowing you to pluck embryos straight out of mammals to incubate within, reset those mating timers quicker, and check stats to see if it was an embryo you wanted, just like an egg incubator that we wouldn't see return to ARK Ascended until almost 1 whole year later, but the tool used to do so offered a whole genetically modifying game, able to track almost any creature on the map, and so much so that I've got to wonder how we lived without one. And now every wild creature now spawned with a specific trait, with a wide library of variables to improve every stat in any number of ways, alongside buffs to both creatures and riders, with each offering 3 tiers of rarity. To name every single one will extend this vid way more than it already is, I know. But keeping it specific about breeding, there too arrived inherit and mutation traits, namely Robust, offering 1.5, 2.25 or 3.0 probability increases to inherit the higher of its parents' values. Frail, offering 1.5, 2.25 or 3.0 probability decreases to inherit the higher of its parents' values, and most importantly, Mutable, to allow 1.0 or 1.5 or 2.0% probability increases for its child to experience a mutation. Any and all traits offered at random in any stat, mind you, though still boosting that mutation chance from 7.31% to a whopping 9.31% chance if finding a tier 3 in the stat you desired. A big if with, RNG, but a worthy grind for serious breeders out there. And with your gene scanner, the ability to withdraw the trait and inject to any creature of the same species, allowing you to store any for later within your gene storage. And not forgetting being stackable at least up to 3 times with mutable traits could see a heavy improvement, especially when mutating past 2020 on one of your family trees. Oh, and Basilisks and Carcinos became breedable. Yay. December 2024 came along with yet another Bob-filled breeding treat. The final phase of the DLC, arriving alongside Extinction, brought with it the makeshift Mega Lab. Initially appearing to be a simple souped-up chem bench, if having the element shards spare would find an alternative babyfy option, allowing you to finally reclaim any missed imprints by dialing back to an appropriate maturation percentage. But perhaps a bigger reason to use to babyfy any wild or non-imprinted dinos, saving you any breeding at all to quickly imprint that high level you just wanted that extra 30% imprint rider boost on, or use with any cloned creatures to chuck an imprint on too. Or imprint creatures that weren't breedable but offered a baby stage, i.e. zombie wyverns. A few months later in Feb 2025 saw our very first almost premium mod turned DLC map, with a wonder if that'll ever happen again. And with it a pre-Gen 2 Maewing variant, the Maeguana. Look, it's literally all but name and aesthetics. But with it, all of the awesome baby raising abilities we discussed earlier with the Maewing, with one slight caveat: its food stat to dictate its trough range instead of nursing effectiveness, but seeing you'd want to level that for boosted feeding anyway, it was a no-brainer. To think it couldn't get any easier, June 2025 delivered with a wealth of new breeding features with the arrival of Raasclark and the Lost Colony pre-order DLC. First up, skills. On top of a 10% imprint buff to every creature imprinted, a new allowance to both bypass 30% of your imprint affinity by automatically applying to any tamed creature, and pass your imprint over to another allied player for up to 60 minutes on a creature of your choosing. A huge bonus if needing a second imprinted rider with no time for them to raise their own babies. Granted though, you'd still need to do a bit of grinding if you intended to unlock any of these skills. And then Bison Milk. Boy oh boy, Bison Milk. Originally intended to be offered as an alternative substitute to wyvern milk to keep those raising baby draconis fed, if requiring an imprint of milk and then fed bison milk would find a 10% maturation boost instantly. Someone might have found it working on a rare occasion with any creature too, and maybe exploited it to grow any baby up to 100%. And to satisfy the last few creature breeding desires, griffins finally became breedable, with Phoenix following just after. And if you haven't tried an imprinted griffin yet, you really should. Sometime just after RAG launching, a very welcomed but strange shadow patch dropped, like there wasn't even one mention of this. But now incubating eggs had a visible indicator on if they were incubating or not. Blue if too cold, red if too hot, or a warm orange glow if temperature perfect. Still a weird one that it never got mentioned. And almost finally, October 2025 saw Valguero arrive with a new form of breeding, crop plot breeding, to plant Elderclaw seeds in, satisfy its cravings, and pop out your very own well-fertilized, well-fed baby bear Groot. And before you mention I missed rhinos, look, it's still kind of technically gestating, right? We've already got a lot to talk about. But what's finally, well, to save the best for last, ASA Mutations and the Tech Binoculars. Both arriving at launch, ASA Mutations is perhaps the biggest change for breeders since mutations were mutations. Because instead of mutation levels stacking onto a stat, it's now its own individual stat. Which means that process of finding the best possible wild stats first before mutating no longer needed. You can now breed and mutate any levels you want, and if you find a higher stat parent later, you can simply move those mutation levels over to your new better breeder. To try and simplify it, in ASE there were only two variables, base wild points and leveled points. If you mutated, those would get added to your base wild points. In ASA, there's now three variables, base wild points, leveled points, and mutated points. And mutations now only get added to mutation points. You still need to be careful on that 2020 family tree, of course, but it enables you to start working on mutations straight away. To be honest though, it won't make too much sense until unlocking Tech Binoculars, and they were previously a weirdly hidden and very differently working spyglass upgrade that people found during Genesis 1's launch. But now an official Alpha Overseer Ascension Tech Engram reward, allowing you to scope and track all wilds to check their pre-tame levels to see if they're worth the bother taming, as well as scoping and tracking pretty much everything for more information. Also giving you a very clear indicator on stat points of every tame you own, clearly showing its base level in each stat, how many levels, and mutation levels. A truly perfect reward for seasoned breeders that you will never want to part with once starting to use. With a wonder, what on earth could ARK bring next to change breeding even more? Let me see your guesses below, and for the love of everything, please like this video and push it out into the algorithm world, because this took far too long to put together. I didn't even get to mention 2x rates and event rates. Maybe we'll be saving event rate stuff for another video. Until then, my name is Raasclark. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and as always, damn it, peace out, I hit the mic. Screw you.